God of the universe, maker of the stars, who am I that you would know my name?
And it's time for Life on Purpose. And we do have all the zoo animals back with us this week. Two of them been gone.
That's right.
And of course, me and Daniel, we filled in for you guys. So no problem. Nobody really missed you. Yes, we did miss you.
Yeah.
We missed you guys being all down
Yes.
there in Dakota doing this thing. It's like, man, wish we could make things happen. But it was amazing how being around a group of people like that, how much you just teaching people their purpose too at around campfire. It was just happening over and over and over again. It was really amazing. But I'm glad we're back and we're going to make this work and see it happen, man.
Yeah, we're going to make this work tonight. And the next 2 weeks, we're going to try to make it work, as I'm going to be in Israel. I leave Bezrat Hashem, God willing, and with his help. And, flights and all that kind of stuff. I'll be in the land next Monday night. So we will be broadcasting on my end. Will be from the Shel HaSharon Hotel in Ariel, Israel, as I start the Connect Israel tour and my 31st trip to the land. But we're going to talk a little bit about Sukkot tonight. Maybe some people don't know what Sukkot is. The Feast of Tabernacles, found in Leviticus chapter 23. I know of no other person on this program tonight than to explain the 8-day camping trip than Ryan Cribbs.
For sure.
Oh yeah, that's exactly it. And guys, for those of you who are celebrating it and would like to share that fun festival with your friends, that's a good way of describing it. Don't tell them what it is, other than just say, "Hey, would you like to come with me on an 8-day camping trip?" If those of you who heard my testimony know that's how it was sold to me.
Hook, line, and sinker, right?
Hook, line, and sinker, exactly. But truly, I feel like it's definitely a time, it talks in the scriptures about how the Father would walk among the camp of his people. That is definitely the case with Sukkot. It every year that I go, I feel like he's there. He's walking with his people, and he reveals something new and does something miraculous, it seems, every year. So for those of you who are listening who have never celebrated the Feast of Sukkot before, if you have a chance and you can find a place to celebrate it with, or even if you're just doing it in your backyard in a tent, which I don't advise. Some people have
this year.
But I hear you. It's definitely not as much fun, but if you can get together with people and do that, like-minded believers, it's definitely worth doing. Absolutely.
Well, speaking of backyard in a tent, Daniel, how was your Sukkot?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little last week. I can hardly remember anything that I said yesterday, let alone a week ago. But my Sukkot was pretty special in one way, and in some ways. Ryan and Dave, we were talking just briefly how I was just really touched that the Father always meets us in whatever season we're in. And so, whether you're in a season where, I don't know, gosh, 6, 7, 8 years ago for me, I was at the big Sukkots with all my friends, and we were, worshiping and, just all this kind of stuff. And, big groups, giant dance circles, go from that to this year, brand new baby in the backyard, Sukkoting with the cat and the dog in the tent. And, just, it's a lot different. But, I think, I know I've mentioned this, but the main thing the Father has been teaching me recently, maybe this year, is to find him in whatever season we're in. And when you do that, there's just moments everywhere you look. And so it was really special in one way. I know the kids really had a good time this year.
So let me ask you a question, David. Why do you do this?
Oh man, why do I do this? Oh, I know.
Okay, guys, just sit back and relax. We'll just say goodbye at the end of the show. Okay, go ahead, David.
Exactly. I said there's too much to talk about here. One, it's a commandment, but honestly, I've told people when we go to Sukkot we've been going to the same place for now about 5 years now, and I think about, as soon as I leave Sukkot, I'm thinking about next year's Sukkot and what I'm hoping to achieve, or what I'm hoping to bring to the table next year. It's just something that I don't look at like New Year's Eve or I don't look at that stuff anymore. It's about this celebration of joy. I think that's the best way of looking at it. Like, why do you do it? I mean, I don't want to just go, oh, it's commanded in the Bible to observe the Feast of Sukkot. And it was also one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts, which you get to now go and be part of the land, which God willing, soon we'll all be there too. So like that kind of idea that you're supposed to be there. And I know that he's always there. Ryan touched on this, Daniel touched on this. You're not just, it's a camping trip, but it's so much more than that. So much more. I'll stop myself right there because that's really what it's so much more. And you're just being with God right there.
Yeah. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but Sukkot and the Feast of Tabernacles, it's not a Jewish thing.
Yeah.
It's a biblical thing. It's something that God commanded to his people. He didn't command just the Jews. He commanded his people in the wilderness. And, so whoever needs to hear that, like, we don't do this out of legalism. We don't do this out of because we have to. Like, we started doing it because we believed we should. But out of that has developed a deep love and a longing, because we understand that when God commands something, he doesn't do it for no reason. Like, he does it on purpose. The more we learn about life and science and just all this kind of stuff, like, it all lines up with what he says. And so, as we do this, at least for me, like, I've developed just this, everything that he commands us, we look backwards and we look forward. And so, it's this time of Sukkot, it's about remembering when he delivered his people, but when they spent the time in the wilderness, it's about remembering that. But it's also about looking forward to what is to come. And what is to come is that, Dad, you talk about this all the time, where Sukkot is this practice time, this, this time that we just look forward to the feast, like the Feast of the Lamb, when we are with Yeshua after Judgment Day has come, after all this stuff. Like, it's party time. Like, it's time to, be with all the people that we love, that, align themselves with him. And, it's amazing.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, we take a time out of our year, and there's nowhere for anybody that's maybe not real familiar with this, there's nowhere in the scripture that tells us we got to go camping. Okay. That is something that's being done now, literally all over the country, all over the world. There are Sukkot gatherings, Feast of Tabernacles, that are springing up. I'm amazed. I was astonished as I was following on Facebook, all of these gatherings. I remember when, there was like 1 or 2, and now they're all over the place. But there's nowhere that tells us to do that. But it says, the scripture in Leviticus chapter 23 says, you are to dwell in temporary dwellings through this time. So for us, for my wife, I was out of town at a Sukkot gathering. So we set up a makeshift sukkah on our back porch, and Kathy had her meals out there. And when I came home, we would have our meals out there and spend time. And we're not in the kingdom, guys. I don't know if you've noticed that. If you've been watching the news lately, we're not in the kingdom yet. And so it is a practice session. And there should be, no matter where, if we're at Elijah Clark State Park or Oklahoma or various places that these Sukkots are going, there should be a longing that one day we're going to all be together in Israel, in the land, in the kingdom, and Messiah will be seated upon a throne. And as Isaiah 2 says, his Torah will go forth from Jerusalem, his word from Mount Zion.
That's right.
Amen.
That's absolutely right.
I think that was one thing we noticed too, is that, like, I remember the first time we started Sukkot, like, started observing the feast, it was something on the back porch, or like Daniel's talking about, tent set out in the backyard. And again, back when we did it, there wasn't nobody doing it either. It was very, very far and few between. But now it is amazing. You look it up, and I guarantee you, if you were able to go on Facebook or one of these social media places, there's always some gathering of people gathering together. There is something, or at least go visit. If I at least could say that, maybe you don't want to go there because you don't want to, just go visit. Because we had people from hours away come and visit just for the weekend that they could get on. because they could go spend time with you. But man,
Yeah.
if you are fortunate, I'll say that if you are been blessed and fortunate enough to be able to take that entire 8 days off, wow, you will not regret it. You will
Yeah.
not. You will not regret it at all.
I got a question for somebody here.
Mhm.
This is specific. This is to Ryan.
Okay.
A number of years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, you were invited to the now famous 8-day camping trip.
Yes.
Have you thought about this? What would have happened if you'd said no?
I have thought about that. I absolutely, it's funny that you bring this up because this past Sukkot that we just had reminded me in pretty big ways, actually, that as fun as Sukkot is or can be, it is not a vacation.
Yeah.
It is an appointed time. And just like an appointment, when you show up, the Father shows up. And so, thinking back on that, had I said no, I really would have been saying no to the appointment that I had with the Father to meet the people that I was appointed to meet, for that to change my life.
Let's unpack that for a moment, Ryan, because I just want to take you down something here. Daniel and I don't know if you guys have had a chance to listen to our podcast from the last 2 weeks, but we talked about the crisis of faith.
Okay.
We talked about owning our faith. Okay.
Okay. Excellent.
So I want to go back to your invitation. Ryan Cribbs has somebody come up to him and says, "Hey, want you to go on this camping trip with me?" Ryan says, "No, I got other plans."
Right.
Consider this. You would not have met Tony.
Nope.
You would not have met your wife.
No.
You would not be married to her.
That's right.
You would not have met David, even though you guys have gone to church together.
That's right.
You wouldn't have met Daniel. You wouldn't, really, you wouldn't have met me.
Nope. We wouldn't have met any of you guys.
We wouldn't have this program. Okay. This
No.
program we would have, if things had worked out, we would have 3 people on it tonight, as we have had, and there would be a void on this program because the person, Ryan Cribbs, would not be here. And
right.
I say that I'm not saying that flippantly, okay? Because
Yeah.
you are an integral part of this program. I've had so many comments about, well, Ryan said, and when we think back, guys, to the crossroads of our lives and the opportunities that were a yes or no answer, what does that make you? I mean, that kind of messes with my brain a little bit, I don't know about y'all's.
Oh, it does, because it could certainly, it's like the butterfly effect. One decision made, it could change your entire course of your life, and your legacy that you will eventually leave behind. It is wild. It's absolutely wild to think about. And it's funny how, Sukkot is very important to me. It really is, because like you mentioned, that was where I first came into walking in Torah, and where I met the people that would eventually introduce me to my wife. And it was actually at a Sukkot, the one we were actually talking about it right before we started the show today, the Sukkot at Lake Swan, that I got to actually get to know my future wife better. At that time, I always say the best pickup line ever, gentlemen, is, "Hey, would you like to play checkers?" Just to
I
throw
can
that
tell
out
you
there.
that I'm twice any of y'all's age, and I've never used that one.
Just throwing it out there, it worked in my case.
Different
So,
generation,
Okay.
the different generational line you can use.
I think
Different words.
exactly. It's not fancy, but it
love it.
works.
There you go. Got to keep it simple. I think that, probably any of us could point to a numerous amount of encounters that we've had with the Father during Sukkot. I know for me, it was at a Sukkot that I got saved.
Yeah.
It was at a Sukkot that, even before that, it was at a Sukkot that I'll go into the story because I think it's a good one. It's a good story. Dad, you were teaching the men's dance, and
Yeah,
in that
absolutely.
dance there is a move. It's a very simple dance, but it is very masculine. It's very powerful. There's a dance move where it's essentially you're reaching. It's called strongholds. I remember is what you called it. You reach up and you pull down. You're pulling down those strongholds. And I remember you were teaching it to all these men in this little tent. And you were saying, be praying about this moment when we get to this moment in the song. Be asking God, what are the strongholds in my life that need to be pulled down? And I was, 12, 13 at the time. And, we had just moved to Oklahoma, all this stuff. And we go to do that dance that evening. And when we get to that move, I look up and it's almost as like clear as it's written on the ceiling. Public school. I was in public school at the time, and we had just moved from Arizona, where we were in a good situation with the public school, to Oklahoma, where it was less good. And it was just like I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Father was telling me to get out of public school. And I approached you guys about that because I felt so strongly about it. And I'm not saying that's everyone's case. I'm saying that was what he was teaching me in that moment. And that was at a Sukkot. And I think one of the reasons that we find so many encounters at Sukkot or on Shabbat or on Passover or Yom Kippur is because the very nature of us observing that is obedience. We are going into a moment of obedience, which has already, with our actions, paved a way to encounter him.
That's very true. It's funny that you mentioned the dance that you teach, the men's dance. Mike, I actually had to reference that this Sukkot. I was actually talking with a gentleman, a very close friend, and we were going through some of those things, talking about the tearing down of strongholds and everything. And I remembered that part of the dance where it's basically all the men have locked arms, basically, where each one is supporting the other. And it was amazing how, you just brought this up, Daniel, and here I was bringing this up and using it as an example of what brotherhood is, or what manhood is, as we're walking this out together, that, we all support each other and hold each other up. It's funny how we're running on the same thread here.
Yeah. Just for everyone out there, we literally talked for about 10 seconds before we had pushed start on this thing.
It was, David was like, hey, are we going to talk about what we're going to talk about? No, we're just going to hit the button. Okay. It's funny because, I am by my own admission, I'm a zero talent person. Okay. I have none. I cannot dance. And this is one dance that I was taught back in 1997, was literally thrown into it because I was working with the ministry and they'd choreographed it, and one of the guys didn't show up, and they said, "You're in." I said, "I can't dance." And they said, "Get in here and do it." And it's this one dance that the Father has given me. I can't do any other dances. I can't. Okay. But this has been a really amazing thing. Back to this thing of the, you're mentioning Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot. In Hebrew, this is Moedim, and it literally means the appointed times. And it is a time that's to be set apart. All of us are married. Okay, all four of us are married. Is an anniversary? I mean, me and Kathy have done like 41 of them. It seems like, okay, that's like ridiculous. Why do this again? But isn't an anniversary kind of a way of acknowledging the past, the future, and celebrating what you've been through and what you're looking forward to? I mean, isn't that kind of the same concept?
Yeah,
I think so.
Oh yeah,
I absolutely think so.
I think as I don't know if maybe I'm not talking to the choir, but I think that as guys we can look at it as, it's just a date set for something, and sometimes we might lose the how significant it is because we're either so buried and wrapped up in other things. But it's such an important day, especially to acknowledge, because if you don't, wife's going to remind you when she reminds you, it is not a good thing. Thankfully, I've never made a mistake.
Yep.
But
believe me,
uh,
I know what that's like. Okay. Because I did miss one. And the great thing about it is the next year, Kathy missed one. I think it was the next year. And so we kind of equaled it out. You know, it's like, okay, you got one, I got one. Let's call it even and move on. We'll have another one.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that's the good one. Have another one.
There you go.
that's like to say these appointed times like you're talking about. I'm just going to interject this point that's what Sukkot is for us. It's like, I mean, we could easily make all kinds of excuses that would be in the world's eyes. Oh yeah, that you're doing the right thing. You're doing the responsible thing by not going and doing that silly camping trip because there's this, and all these other things that you've got to worry about. And I was like, nah, no, cutting off from the world. Please God, let there be like very limited internet. like I want to be cut off because I just want to be focused because then it wasn't focused on your work and all this other stuff. It was focused on then in the place where we were at with work, especially me and Ryan, there'd be just random people that you'd seen or hadn't really talked to, but then there was this depth of conversation that spawned on by a campfire at midnight. Something about it. And again, God walks the camp and then that happens. And then you're like,
Amen.
oh, so I need to impart something to you.
Mhm.
That's why I'm here. There's a testimony within me to tell you, oh, okay, let me tell you what I've seen with this. Or the best thing is when someone else does that to you and you're like, oh, I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. I had both of those things multiple times this Sukkot, which was huge.
Well, when you think about it, what you're really doing is you're creating a sacred space. In a world that wants to create safe spaces, let's create sacred spaces. And in that, you create an actual boundary where the Father's meeting you. And like in our case,
right,
literal camp that is completely, well, I'll tell you, actually, I'll delve in here a little bit. It's part of my Sukkot was spent actually dealing with and being a part of removing demonic possession from a couple of people, where they literally tried to manifest and make themselves known, these spirits. But what they were doing is they were trying to do this within the sacred space and bounds of the Sukkot camp, which was interesting to see because it literally created a threshold that then those spirits had to leave as well. They couldn't exist there. We've learned about threshold covenants, and then this could be a whole nother topic for a whole nother podcast. But it literally created that. And like I said, it creates a space where you're meeting with the Father, even if it's just a little booth on your back deck, like you talked about, where you're going and eating. You're creating that space and saying the only spirit that's welcome here is the Spirit of God. For what it's worth.
And that's what I was, I was getting at that same thing too, because, it is the obedience. Like, it's not that, it's not mystic. It's not like this some weird thing, like we do this and then this happens. It's literally just obedience. Like our obedience to the Father produces what you're saying, the sacred spaces. And, it's just, I think it's a very freeing moment when you realize that when you get freed from the legalistic approach to things, because again, we don't do it because we have to. Maybe at the beginning we do, but we do it because the Father created these things to spend time with us. Like, he literally knows exactly who we are as humans, what our tendencies are is to, get over busy and not stop and just keep working and striving and grinding and, all this stuff. But he commands us a lot. Like, you, you really start to understand how much he commands you to stop and be with him when you have to ask off for work for all these things. Like, it's nice when you don't have to, but when you're like, so I need that day, and then I need that day, and I also need that day and that day, and I need that day too. So, it's so like, it's just the Father. Like, he just wants to create he wants to create these spaces so that he can enter in. It's not just, on our end, it's on his end too,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We had this conversation, I think a few weeks back about Shabbat. And that's how I looked at Sukkot, the same idea. You're choosing that day that I know that I look forward every week to Shabbat, and then every year I'm looking forward to Sukkot. Like that's like in my head, that's how I'm looking at those kind of things. And Shabbat, I don't know what I would do without Shabbat. So choosing to say, no, I don't care what society and the world is saying, like you're saying, I'm gonna make every effort I can to doing that. And now it's at a point where, because of that thought process, you don't even think about. We had a very lengthy discussion, being Bereshit, Genesis 1. We're talking about the Shabbat and how everything was made, and then seventh day rested. And there was a wonderful question someone had about things. And it was like, it gets to a point where if you decide to make some of these things like staples in your life, then the Father will meet you when you decide, I'm going to take that time. And I think that Mike has been a very big proponent, even during when we've had conversations with other, especially young people. And this was a question from a young person. If you make the time to say, nope, this is between me and God, that's it. Even in just a random day, not even a prescribed day, not even a day that in the Bible it says to do it. I will honor that and show up in a big way. But it's even more so when it's like, it's a feast. Like it's a day that he's committed. He's like, hey guys, come here to do this, because I don't know how I would not want to do these days now anymore.
I know. Yeah.
There's so much of him there.
Yeah. And it comes down to a word that's been kicked around a few times here: obedience.
That's right.
You guys are all worship leaders. Okay. I'm not, as is obvious, but, worship has been one of these things that's been relegated to music and to dance and all of these kind of things. In just a couple of weeks, I'll be actually less than 2 weeks. I'll be at one of my favorite places in all of Israel, and that is the Haas Promenade. Daniel's been there with me a couple times. And this is a place that is a little south of Jerusalem. It's between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It's a hilltop that I believe that this is where Abraham came when he was told to leave the area of Hebron. He would have walked directly north, and his first look at Jerusalem would have been from that place, which is now the Haas Promenade. And I won't go into the whole teaching, but basically he would have seen three valleys, which would have formed the Sheen, the Hebrew letter Sheen, which is the letter which points us to El Shaddai, the one who is our provision. But the amazing words in those verses, and I teach about this when I'm there, is that Abraham looked at his servants that were with him and said, you guys stay here. Me and the boy are going to go and worship, and we will return.
Yeah.
Now, guys, I don't want to be, I don't want to be offensive to you guys, but he did not have an Exodus Road Band CD in his pocket.
Nope.
I'm offended for you guys.
No.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
There was no word. There was no music. There was no, he didn't have a band with him. He didn't have a guitar with him, but it says he worshiped.
Yes.
And so I believe that the highest form of worship is obedience.
Yes.
And if we're not obedient, then our music is just noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly right. And our music loses its power and the anointing that the Father's given it.
So it becomes entertainment?
It does. I actually have in the past done kind of some small blurbs while we've quote unquote led worship. Yeah. Because everybody goes, it's the praise and worship center. Every church has the praise and worship hall or whatever, you know what I mean? Or praise and worship night. And it's two different things. Praise is to exalt. Worship, in my opinion, is basically to be on your face, to be broken before the Father, to place yourself in His hands. It's it's so much more than just singing a song. And
Mhm.
like you said, Mike, it's obedience, which again, placing yourself in his hands so that, like the potter, he can mold you at will, right? To reference some things,
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think one of the best kind of one-liners I've heard of, kind of the difference between praise and worship is that praise is outward expression, worship is inward engagement.
Ooh, I like
And
that. I like that.
yeah, it was a good one. I was like,
Write
man,
that down,
that's
Ryan.
Yeah, I know.
and because it just it expands it, like it does take worship being like directly associated with music out of the box. And because I do believe like that you can be walking down the street and you're presented with a temptation, and that it's what it is, and you say no to that temptation, or whatever that obedience looks like the glory of God has entered into you in that moment because you obeyed,
Mhm.
because you worshiped. Like that is worship. When you obey, when you say no to things that his heart is against, and when you say yes to things his heart is for.
That's right. That's good.
That
That's
is
very
really
good.
So
We
would
might
you
have to
guys
make
say that
t-shirts with
you're,
that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So we might have to make t-shirts with that.
Mhm. That would be a fantastic shirt. I'd wear
That'd be
that.
the new Exodus Road Band t-shirt, right? Would you guys say that you originally went to Sukkot to get, but now you go to Sukkot to give?
Mm.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And thankfully
Expound.
also get as well, this is wonderful. But yeah, it's you want to give out, but then there's other people, and it's amazing how even kids were blessing me beyond belief, and they didn't even know what they did, but they hit me so hard.
By the way, the youth scene at our Sukkot is beginning to, I don't want to use the word rival, but maybe I'll use the word rival. The youth scene at Revive,
Mm.
to just kind of throw that out there to you two guys.
Mm.
It might be
Excellent.
interesting to, and it specifically happens usually at Dave's campsite.
Okay.
They all gather around by the droves.
Wow.
And
Well,
so that might be something to discuss at another time. But yes, like you said, and to compliment Dave some here, Dave does a lot of giving,
mhm.
more than he does getting at Sukkot.
Yeah.
Because not only when those kids are there are they getting fed spiritually, they're usually getting some good food as well.
I'm not planning on leaving with I want to leave everything out. Like if God poured in something in a vessel, and I think that I'm pouring as much as I can back out, and as much vessels as I can find, as much vessels
Amen.
that will want to receive.
And you know what? The more you
Ooh.
pour out, the more he's going to pour into you to pour out. Like
Maybe
it's,
so.
like you're saying,
Yeah.
you give and then he gives you more, and you get more, and you give and it just,
Exactly.
and it's the process we all should be walking through where, you have to start by getting, like, any baby believer, you need to receive, because you can't give from something you don't have.
Yes.
But it's the sign of a
True.
mature believer when you see that switch
Mhm.
toward giving.
Exactly.
But,
Yes.
It really is awesome.
it's like the topography in Israel teaches us so much. We'll be in a couple of weeks. We'll be down at the Dead Sea, and it's really dying, right? Because there's nothing coming into it right now, and they're trying to figure it out because of all kinds of other issues. But we see the Sea of Galilee, and then we have the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is alive. There's fish. There's life there, because what it takes in, it also gives out. But the Dead Sea, there's they have found some form of life there, but it's for the most years they believed there was nothing alive in there. But why? Because it only takes, and it never gives out. And so just even in the topography of Israel is a message to each of us. Whatever the Father gives us is not really for us. It's
Yeah.
to give out.
Mhm.
And the more you give out, the more he pours in. But the moment that you quit giving out, then that what he gave you becomes stagnant, and it becomes lifeless.
It does.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that.
It's like the parable of the talents, just, the one that tried to protect it by, burying it, not doing anything with it, it became nothing and he was punished for it. And it's the same thing with, that applies in every way. It applies financially, it applies, physically, it applies spiritually, with whatever he gives us. It's so, our logic in our world is backwards. We think, bury it to protect it, but the best way you can protect it is to give it away freely.
Yeah, the logic of the world, they don't understand us.
Yeah,
And I get that all the time. I mean, I told guys that I know that are pretty much secular or they go to church, and this is not an anti-Christian statement, but they go for the holy hour where they show up at 11 o'clock sharp and leave at 12 o'clock dull. It's meaningless to them. It really doesn't affect their lives, and I see that on when I see these guys. And I would say, I'm heading to Florida. Well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm speaking. You're driving all the way to Florida to speak? Yeah. So I drove to Florida, which was like, that was like 7.5, 8 hours each way to speak one time. I spoke for 90 minutes. And it's a message you guys have heard. So I think y'all can probably do it in my voice. It's the shofar message. But there were people that came to me in tears and said, this is what I came to Sukkot for. I needed to hear this message. These are things that I've been dealing with. As a good friend of mine used to say to me before he passed away, life is not about you. Life is about him, and life is about others. And so when we get to the place of not living for ourselves, but as David, I've seen you do this, living to give your life into other people. That's when life has purpose.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. It's funny because just to throw this out there as well, the sort of the message that kept being the resonating thing, the Sukkot, was set the captives free. And the only way we could do that is by pouring into whomever the Father sets us before us to pour into. Because there's so many people bound by so many things in this world. And if we can even set free one, it's worth it. It's worth, like you say, the 8-hour trip, one way. It absolutely is.
And I think this ties back to, the series we've been going through of, the 5 questions, who are you and where do you come from? Because when you realize that you are someone important and that you come from somewhere important, and you realize that you have something to offer, like, that's when this stuff happens. Like when you realize that you have something to offer, because, for one, the enemy's going to try to crush your idea of that you have something to offer. And then he's going to try to crush you in your offering of it. And, when we walk around, it's amazing how difficult it is to step out of our comfort zone and share and talk to people and just be the icebreaker and go into it, because all it takes is one testimony to set the captives free, and the enemy's going to try to crush that. He's going to try to tell you, oh, they don't want to hear what you have to say. They don't want to hear your story. They've got other stuff going on, all that kind of stuff. But it's important. Yeah.
I want to highlight briefly here that there was two people in particular that spoke to me a ton at Sukkot, and I think they might have even traveled the farthest distance to get there. But I want to use this as a testimony to others out there that might be leery of this or might be hesitant. But I know without a shadow of a doubt the reason why those two, I'm gonna call them kids, but they were much older than just being kids, brother and sister. They both came more than likely only for the pure intention of just to hang out with their friends. But God had something planned for them even more. Wow. And first day of Sukkot was answers to prayer for a lot of questions they had, and they just showed up. And they spoke so much to me, and I was able to pour so much into both this seeing what they did and just being obedient. And I wanted to leave that. Sometimes that you don't realize when you're a young one. I guess I could say that maybe the one you've raised and you're questioning why they're doing what they're doing. They went off what they thought was just them wanting to hang out with their friends, but God had other intentions for them and set all these people up in their path when they got there that they left changed. I know they came expecting something, one thing, they left with something totally different and more than they could have ever expected. So that's not just for an 8-day camping trip message. That's just in general, like I had to tell this to somebody there as well. If God's got your kids and you might be afraid of what's happening, you ain't gonna let them go. He's gonna let them reach all the way out. And he's like, all right, no, now I'm calling them back. Now I'm bringing them back. And I think we've had tons of testimonies like you all have already talked about with others where you're like, who knows what's gonna happen with that.
Yeah.
And God's got a funny way of just showing up when they least expect it, and they yearn for it so much. It was encouraging to me because I know going into Scott, I was just like, man, because we've had this is kind of really one of the reasons why we even did this program is who's out there, who's talking, who's saying these things to anybody, especially in this, what we're calling like 18 to 30, maybe. I think Mike, you coined it the forgotten generation, maybe. I think you coined
that was Daniel.
Okay, that was Daniel. Okay, I was about to say, well, it was a Clayton that said it.
I should have said it, but
forgotten generation is that forgotten thing, and but it gave me so much more hope after being at Sukkot because I was seeing so much of this forgotten generation rising up, and that's your term, the rising generation. That's your term, Mike. And I was actually seeing it with my eyes, so that was fascinating. That gave me so much more. Okay, cool. This is happening. It isn't just like, oh Lord, can we stoke this fire more? Can we get this rising thing happening a little quicker? But God's got this. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see how this program is going to play a massive role in that. It made me excited to see that. It was awesome, super awesome.
Good deal. Closing thoughts, guys.
I'll let you go first, Daniel, if you got something, or David.
I don't. I mean,
I think
this was just go ahead, David.
I'm about to say closing thing. I'll say just if you can take that opportunity in your everyday. We're talking about the Moedim that are set in the scripture, set in the Bible. But now we've got quite a bit of lengthy time between now and the next feast. You got Shabbat, but it made me more realize how much more if I just set the time up. I don't have to set the time away I don't have to go to my boss to say, hey, here are all these days I need off. There's also times where you can go, you know what, this hour to this hour, I need to set apart for myself with the Almighty and do that inward engagement. That's what I'm talking about. Like more time spent there will make all those other feasts that much more enjoyable. I think that's one of the closing thoughts I want to bring out in this episode.
And maybe this is new to people. We've got people that are tuning in, and you think you just happened to click that button. Nobody happens. Nothing just happens. I love my favorite definition of coincidence is a miracle in which God chooses to remain anonymous.
That's cool.
Okay, so he directs us into things. And maybe, we have people out there, they're like Shabbat and, and Sukkot and Passover and all these things. Let me give you a challenge. Try it. Just try it.
Yes.
You never know how it may change your life, huh, Ryan?
That's exactly right. And I feel like the Spirit's telling me something here just to share. If you've tuned into this program and you're listening for the first time, or if you're a repeat listener, and you have been going through some stuff, you feel like you have been, attacked by the enemy, let's say. Remember that the Father does not, or excuse me, let me back up. The enemy does not attack non-strategic targets.
Yeah.
The only reason you're being attacked is because of how important you are to the Father. And it might be that opportunity set before you, like we talked about in the beginning of this program, saying yes to certain things or saying no to certain things, is literally going to change your life, change the course of your life, and set you in the direction that the Father wants you to go. As Dave just recommended, every day set aside that time to take with the Father, that sacred space where you meet him. And if you've not celebrated Shabbat before or any of the biblical feast, check them out and see if it doesn't just change your life and maybe the lives of your friends and family as well by you being obedient. And worshiping through that obedience as well.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. And to go along with that, read the scriptures, read the Bible, and read it from the perspective that the Father, he's not, read it from the perspective that he is a caring Father who has a personal purpose in what he commands us to do. It's not him testing our, like, oh, are they going to do this? Are they going to do this if I ask him to do it? Read it from the perspective that he's like, I want time with you. I want to be with you. I want to bless you. And this is the avenue by which you do it. And so, I just feel like that goes along with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I guess it brings up the question, can one man make a difference?
Yes.
Could you give me okay, let me give you a hint. This week's Torah portion is named after somebody in the scripture. So can one man make a difference? What's that guy's name?
Noah.
Yep.
Yeah. If it wasn't for Noah, none of us would be talking, because our DNA would have drowned in the flood. All right.
Yeah.
Remember, guys, everyone, the scripture says, I know the plans I have for you, not for evil, but for good, to give you life and a purpose. So live life on purpose. And next week, God willing, I'll be talking to you from Israel. See you guys.
That.
Sounds good. See you.
You alone hear my every prayer. You're the God who's always